Priyavajra. Welcome to London Buddhist Centre. Especially welcome if you haven't been here before. It's always lovely to see new people. Adventure through our doors here. It can sometimes sort of seem a little, London Buddhist Centre can sometimes seem a little bit imposing. You've got those big doors there and you're not quite sure what's behind them. So it's really lovely on open days to open the big red doors and then people can wander in and see what goes on. So I've been asked to talk about what is Buddhism. So I'll attempt to do that for about 40 minutes, and then if you've got any questions, you can ask them. But I want to start with a story, and it's a true story, and it takes place in northern India 2,500 years ago. So we're talking about a very agricultural, very traditional society. And it's about a woman called Kisagotami. And Kisagotami is described as the daughter of a nobody. She's a lower caste woman. And in India, even today in rural communities, that would put you at the bottom of the heap. Certainly 2,500 years ago, you would not have much status in society if you were a lower caste woman. But despite this handicap of birth, she ends up being married to quite a wealthy, quite a high status man. I'm sort of quite struck by this because this would have been going against the conventions of society. So I imagine he must have loved her very much to probably go against his family and to go against society. And like most women, even today in rural India, when you get married, you move in with your husband's family. And they do not often treat you very well. They treat you almost as a servant. And your job is to do cleaning, cooking, and almost serve the rest of the family. But Kisagotami does the one thing that she can do to raise her status in the family's eyes. And that is she gives birth to a male child. And of course, she's very devoted to her child. But shortly after the child is born, something rather tragic happens. Her husband, who as I say must have loved her very dearly, falls ill, and very soon he dies. So now she is, to a large extent, alone, still in her husband's family, and of course all her love is going to go into this child. All her energy, all her feeling is focused on this child of hers. But then the second tragedy happens, and the child falls ill. And right in front of her eyes, he grows thin, he wastes away, and it is not long before he too is dead. And Kisagotami is completely and utterly distraught. She has probably what we would call a complete mental breakdown. She cannot accept this double tragedy. It's too much for her. It's too much for her. And she simply cannot accept the death of her child. She cannot accept it. It's just impossible for her. So she does this rather alarming thing. She carries the child around on her hip, as mothers would do then. even though the child is dead. And of course the neighbours, the family are very distraught. They look at her and they say, Kissa, go to me, Kissa, go to me. Your child is dead, your child is dead. And she says, no, the child is not dead. I need medicine. I need medicine for the child. Can you give me medicine for my child? So this is the state she's in. And this goes on and on and on. People keep on telling her the child is dead, but she can't accept it. It's too much. She can't accept it. She wants medicine for the child to make the child better. So what happens eventually is that the family hear that the Buddha is staying just outside the town. And they suggest that Kissa Gotami goes and visits the Buddha. And they persuade her that the Buddha can help her. So she goes, she leaves the village, and eventually she finds the Buddha surrounded by his monks, living in a small settlement, or sort of camping in a small settlement just outside the town. And she goes to the Buddha in front of all of his monks and asks the Buddha for medicine for her child. And you can imagine this scene. The monks are around the Buddha, and then there's probably lots of other people from the village and from the towns around watching this, and they're really wondering what's going to happen, because the Buddha is renowned for telling the truth. But they told Kissa Gotami the truth, and she can't accept it. So what's she going to do? Well, to their surprise, he says, Kissa Gotami, yes, I can help you. I can help you. You need some medicine for the child. But the medicine must contain mustard seed. So mustard seed is a very common ingredient in Indian meals. Every household would have mustard seed, so this is not a problem. And then he says, yes, but there's one more thing. The mustard seed must, for this medicine to work, the mustard seed must come from a family where no one has died. So Kissa Gotami almost immediately goes off. She goes back home. She goes back home to get the mustard seed for the Buddha so she can have the medicine. So she's nearly home. She knows there's mustard seed at home, so she's nearly home. And then she realises, of course, that's no good going home because her husband died only a short while ago. So she goes next door to get mustard seed. Knocks on the door. Mustard seed, I need some mustard seed. I need some mustard seed for the Buddha. The Buddha's going to make me some medicine for my child. And the woman, of course, says, yes, of course, no problem, here's some mustard seed. And then Kissa Gotami said, oh, just a minute, no one's died here, have they? And of course the woman says, Kissa Gotami, don't you remember? It was only 6 months ago when my cousin died in this very house. So Kissa Gotami said, that's no good. Go to the next house. Similar sort of things. Goes to the next house, similar sort of things. So she goes from door to door, and she hears of the deaths of husbands, wives, uncles, cousins, children. And after a while, something dawns on her, and this thought comes into her mind. She says, the dead are many and the living are few. But something deeper than this happens. She realises, she comes to a realisation, she realises that death is all around us, that death is an inevitable part of human existence. She realises that, well, the death of her husband was not an individual tragedy. It's what happens. People die. And this deep realization touches her, and she looks at her child, and she knows the child is dead. So she takes the child to the cemetery, the charnel ground, where it can be cremated, and lays it down on the ground. And then she goes back to the Buddha. She goes back to the Buddha stands in front of the Buddha and bows and says nothing for a while. And then she says, the mustard seed has done its work. The mustard seed has done its work. And she realizes that the Buddha, of course, knew that this would happen. The Buddha knew that this would happen. And the Buddha has taught her an important lesson. And she asks the Buddha if she can become one of his disciples and become a nun. So this is the story of Kiss Go To Me. I think I've always been very touched by the story. I think it's a very beautiful story. And one of the things that touches me is the Buddha's wisdom and compassion. Compassion in that he responds directly to Kiss Go To Me's suffering. He doesn't try to impose anything on her. He responds directly to where she is at. It's a sort of teaching without a teaching. And yes, his wisdom in doing that. Okay, and out of this story, I think I want to draw my conclusion to what is Buddhism, and I think it is principally these two things. It is wisdom and compassion. The Dalai Lama was once asked this question: "What is Buddhism?" And he responded, "My religion is kindness. My religion is kindness." But compassion, what is compassion? Compassion is what happens when kindness meets suffering. It is a kindly response to suffering. It is what you feel when you hear of the tragic events in somewhere like Syria. You know, you listen to the news about Syria, and what you hear stories that really, well, I don't know for you, I can't say what you feel, but I mean, I just find the situation there so tragic, so impossibly painful, that there's no response other than compassion. And that's what we feel. We feel compassion. So it's a kind of natural response of human beings to suffering. There was once an ancient king, and this ancient king is getting quite old now. He's near to death. And he asks all his advisors, all his wise men and wise women, he says, what is the core of Buddhism? What is the essential teaching of Buddhism? And they all try to answer, and he's not satisfied with any of the answers. And then he hears that up in the mountains there is a very, very wise sage. So he goes to the wise sage, and he has to make quite a long journey to reach this wise sage, but eventually he gets to the wise sage, and he says, wise sage, what is the essence of Buddhism? What is the essential part of Buddhism? The wise sage says, cease to do evil, learn to do good, purify the heart. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, purify the heart. And the king says, well, you know, that's not special. I've heard that before. That's a very traditional teaching. I thought you were going to tell me something a bit more profound than that. You know, a child of 10 knows that. You know, any young child knows that. And the wise man says, yes, a child of 10 knows it, and even an ancient king may not be able to do it. So compassion is very, very easy to talk about. Practicing it is another matter. In fact, just practicing kindness is another matter. One of the essential teachings, I think, of the Buddha was that we can and need to actually practice kindness. It's almost like a skill. It's something you can learn to do. It's not something that, in a sense, you either have or don't have. In a sense, we all have it, at least in potentiality. But the Buddha says you have to develop it. You have to learn it. It's like playing football or like learning to dance. You have to learn it and you have to practice it. So it's quite interesting, the sages, he says, learn to do good. Learn to do good. We have to learn to do good. We have to learn to do good. But the Buddha, takes kindness to, I was going to say extremes. It's almost like, for the Buddha, it's like extreme kindness. He once says to his monks, he once told his monks a story, he said, monks, listen to me, if you are abducted by bandits one day, you're wandering through the jungle and some bandits come and catch you, and they saw off your arms and legs, if you get angry with them, then you're not my disciple. You're not my disciple. That's pretty extreme. And I thought, well, what was he saying there? What was he saying there? I think what he's saying is this. He's saying, well, it's very easy, isn't it? I find it very easy to be kind to people who are nice to me. I find it very easy to be generous to people who are generous to me. I find it very easy to be warm and open to people who are warm and open to me. What about the other people? What about the people who are not particularly warm to me? And what about my enemies? What about the people who don't like me? That's when kindness and compassion really come into their own, isn't it? So for the Buddha, kindness and compassion were universal and unconditional. Universal and unconditional. That is, they apply to everybody. Without any conditions. Without any conditions. Without any conditions. And is that possible? Well, it is, but I think it only really, really becomes possible when you recognize that, and you see quite clearly, that we are all intimately connected. We're all connected to each other in much more deeply, much more profoundly than we could actually imagine. And you're listening to me now, and I'm talking about compassion. I could talk about loss, I could talk about anger, I could talk about hatred. And you know what I'm talking about. Why do you know what I'm talking about? Because you have the same emotions as I do. All human beings, wherever they come from, have the same emotions. We're much, much, much more similar than we think. The fact that you could understand not just what I say in a kind of intellectual sense, but your own feelings can resonate with mine, shows us how close we actually are. For me to do harm to another being, even a very slight harm, is as pointless and stupid, I put it that strongly, it's as pointless and stupid as me cutting off my own arm. I mean, could you imagine, I sort of wake up one morning, I'm in a bad mood, and I get really cross in my left hand. I think left hand, you don't really pull your weight. It's the right hand that does all the work most of the time. I just see you're just sitting there doing nothing. So I think, I'm just fed up with you, so I'm going to get the knife and I'm going to slice it off because I'm really cross with you. You wouldn't do that. Well, for the Buddha to do that to another human being would be the same thing. It would be utterly stupid. Utterly stupid. Because he saw that connection with all human beings. He saw how intimately we are connected. So when we harm another human being, we harm ourselves. And he said this very profound thing. He said that whoever loves themselves will never harm another. If you love yourself, if you really truly love yourself deeply, then you will never harm another person. So I think you can take that the other way around. What he's saying there is that when we harm others, whether it's we're rude to them or angry with them or we actually harm them, physically harm them, actually what's going on there is it's our own self-hatred. Actually what's going on there is our own failure to love ourselves, to be kind to ourselves. And it just gets projected outwards. Okay, that's kindness. I just want to say a few words about wisdom. Wisdom is quite difficult to talk about in Buddhism, but what it is, it's seeing things clearly. If you're wise, you see things clearly, and if you lack wisdom, then you see them in a distorted way. You don't see them clearly. So in that story I told you about Kisagotami does not see things clearly. At the beginning of the story, she is not wise. She cannot see that her child is dead. She can't see it. She literally cannot see it. And what the Buddha does is he teaches her wisdom. He teaches her about the universality of death, and she gains wisdom. So wisdom is seeing things clearly. And when we lack wisdom, this is the important thing that the Buddha taught, if when we lack that wisdom, that ability to see things clearly, then we harm ourselves and we harm others. So when Kisagotami can't see that her child is dead, that hurts her and it hurts everyone around her. So what Kisagotami learns to see is the universality of life and death. There is no life without death and no death without life. That they're both part of the same thing. You cannot have one without the other. And we're all going to die. I mean, it's quite a sobering thought, isn't it? But, I don't know, in 80 years' time, everyone in this room will be dead. I'll probably be one of the first to go, but let's not get too technical about it. But there's something in that, isn't there? That's sort of deeply tragic, but also deeply poignant. The fragility of life has a beauty to it. The fact that we share that. We all share that. That's the one thing that is certain, isn't it? Yeah? And it's sort of what connects us. It's one of the things, there is this existential connection between us because we all know, we are all aware of our own mortality and nobody else's. I've been lucky enough to be with people when they're dying, and that connection with that person dying is extraordinary. And of course what happens is, I realise in seeing somebody else die, my own mortality, I see my own fragility, I see my own death, and something opens up that is absolutely extraordinary. Of course, life is full of highs and lows, ups and downs. There are days we win, there are days we lose. There are days when things go well, and days when things don't go so well. Of course, the trouble is that we cling to the highs and somehow believe that we can have a life where it's all good, it's all roses, but of course that's not true. There's a story about a farmer. I think the farmer's name is Joe. So Joe's a very poor farmer. He's got a son, he's got one horse, and some not very good land. Anyway, one day he's ploughing, using his horse to do the ploughing. And the horse runs away, and his neighbours come to him and say, Joe, it's tragic, you lost your only horse, it's gone, it's run away. He looks at them and just says rather nonchalantly, maybe. Next day the horse comes back, And when the horse comes back, it brings some wild horses with it. There's 3 wild horses. So now he's got 4 wild horses. And they say, Joe, you're so lucky. You're such a lucky man. He says, maybe. The next day, his son, his only son, his only companion, tries to ride one of the wild horses, and he gets thrown off the horses and he breaks his leg. The neighbours say, Joe, you're so unlucky. Everything's going wrong for you. He says, maybe. Next day, the military, the army come into the town, and they're looking for recruits for the army. They want to draft people, all the young men, and they come across his son, but they see his son's got a broken leg, so they leave him and take the other young men. The neighbours say, Joe, you're so lucky. You've still got your son. And he just says, maybe. So Joe knows. Joe actually has a bit of wisdom. Joe has a bit of wisdom. He knows that for every high there's a low, for every low there's a high. And he doesn't cling onto the highs. So perhaps we need a bit of that wisdom too. We need a bit of that wisdom to see what life is really like, to see life more clearly, to be able to just be with life as it is. I'm always trying to sort of fix life. I'm always trying to make life, somewhere in the back of my mind, I've got this idea that somehow I can make life always work. I can make it work. I can make it be right all the time. I can get rid of the uncomfortable stuff and have all the nice treats. I still haven't learned after 65 years that you can't do that. You have to live life as it is. You have to face life as it is. You can't fix it. So maybe I need to be a bit more like the farmer Joe.
It's not that he clings to the highs, he doesn't wallow in the lows either.
Indeed. Yeah. And that's part of it, isn't it? Yeah, indeed. So wisdom. I can't say a lot about wisdom because wisdom in Buddhism is not a kind of intellectual activity. It's not being clever. It's not knowing a lot. It's a seeing. Like Kissa Gotami has to see. She has to really see deeply that a child is dead before she can accept it. So that's what wisdom is. You have to see it, and it comes out of perhaps years of contemplation and meditation. And that seeing deepens and deepens, and only really is fully revealed as it is, or fully finished when we become enlightened. And the Buddha says we can all become enlightened in our own lifetimes. It seems an impossible goal, but he says we can. And when you achieve that, then you see the world as it is with complete clarity. So that's the goal of Buddhism. And I think that's what Buddhism is. It's a practice. It's a practice to develop kindness. It's a practice to develop wisdom. It's a practice to develop compassion. It's something you do. Above all, Buddhism is something you do. I think it is a spiritual path. It is on a path you start somewhere and you end somewhere else. And you just have to put one foot in front of the other. It's amazing. I've been involved in Buddhism many, many years now. And when I first got involved in Buddhism, it was something that sort of long-haired hippies with sandals did. I was a long-haired hippie in the 70s and the 60s with sandals, so that's what I did. But what I never imagined was that by the time we got to this millennium, that there would be a meditation group in the Houses of Parliament. That I would go to the Houses of Parliament and they would be talking about meditation. They would be talking about mindfulness. They would have select committees on meditation. That the NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, would recommend meditation as an effective and valid antidote for depression, for stress, and that 70% of the GPs in this country would recommend meditation as a practice for all of their patients. In a recent survey, would recommend meditation as a practice. I never thought I'd see that day, but that's where we are. So we have here a sort of secular wing where we teach meditation and teach awareness to help people with addictions, with depression, with stress, and many other, and just to help them become happier, healthy human beings. So I think my hope for Buddhism is that in some small way it does help to bring a little more kindness, a little more compassion, a little more wisdom to the world. The number of Buddhists in this country is actually tiny, very, very tiny. There's a small group of people, but it seems to be having a bit of an effect on the world, and I hope that continues. I just want to end by just reading out a very, very short passage. And this is just a small extract from a talk that the founder of our order, Sangharakshita, gave in Worli. Worli, I believe, is basically a slum in, or a poorer part of Mumbai. So he's giving a talk on this subject, why am I a Buddhist? So he says, this is one of the reasons why I'm a Buddhist. I believe that humanity is basically one. I believe that it's possible for any human being to communicate with any other human being, to feel for any other human being, to be friends with any other human being. This is what I truly and deeply believe. This belief is part of my own experience. This is part of my life. I cannot live without this belief, and I would rather die than give it up. To me, to live means to practice this belief. Therefore, this belief is part of my religion. It has nothing to do with the way I dress, nothing to do with what I call myself. It is a matter of the way I am, the way I exist. It is the way I naturally function in the world. Thank you.